Diess could be very interesting. And I'm talking about Herbert Diess. He is the CEO of the Volkswagen Group, so selling millions of cars every year. And what he has just said on Twitter is we have to use Chinese speed and local technology platforms to remain worldwide relevant in new auto. So in this video I will talk a bit what this could mean for the auto industry, including NIO and Tesla, and also what this means on a global politics level. First of all, I'm really stoked that Herbert Diess actually retweeted my tweet in which I was just quoting him, because what I noticed is that he made a LinkedIn post about a meeting of CEOs with the Chinese government. So here you see a picture of Mr. Diess possibly sitting in Wolfsburg, and then here you see Mr. Li Keqiang, who is the premier of the State Council of the People's Republic of China, so very high up. And then you'll see many more CEOs, including also Citigroup and Goldman Sachs and other big corporates have joined this meeting, so very high up. And I was just basically tweeting out what Mr. Diess said. We need more cooperation and presence in China, not less. It would be very damaging if Germany or the EU wanted to decouple from China, and it underlined that China is and will be the technology driver, which is very much in contrast to, of course, what we currently see in the media with all of the US-China troubles, with negotiations going on, and all of the sour environment between China and many other countries. And possibly most of these business leaders see it just as Mr. Diess and say that we need to have more collaboration instead of decoupling. Now anyways, what we need to talk here is about China's speed and local technology and the future of the automotive industry and what this could mean for our investments in Tesla and NIO. Now, of course, Mr. Diess is very invested in China. More than 40% of Volkswagen's business is coming from China. Volkswagen has been very early in China since the 80s. And what is interesting is also that it seems that their revenues are declining from 5.2 billion to only 2.7 billion this year, despite that the market is growing. So it seems that Volkswagen has an issue in China and needs to solve that, right? And I mentioned that Diess is very important for Volkswagen because I think he knows about the significance of China, and also Mr. Diess has just become pretty much under pressure internally against the unions and many other of his managers, because he's pushing so much towards the EV revolution, and I think he's doing a great job and kind of trying to save Volkswagen here, but of course he also has much opposition internally. And so what could be the way forward for Volkswagen? Well, of course they may need China for the Chinese speed when it comes to building factories like the Gigafactory in Shanghai, which is now helping Tesla enormously, not only with the local sales, but also with sending Teslas overseas. And of course Volkswagen also needs to leverage this with their current joint ventures. And then the most interesting piece of the sentence here, I think, is using local technology platforms to remain worldwide relevant. So for one, what could be those local technology platforms and why are they necessary to remain relevant worldwide? Well, such platforms could, for example, be the software side like Tencent and Alibaba, which is increasingly being used in Volkswagen cars, also in China, but that doesn't really support the notion that this will help them to go overseas, right? Another aspect would be rather on the business model side and the way the service system works, so relying more on offline and online retail, meaning direct sales to consumers, not going via the dealers. And what I noticed, for example, with Audi building such kind of charging hubs and on which they also have an offline retail system connected to that. Plus also Volkswagen is now coming up with these new Volkswagen stores, which kind of are a replication of what NIO has introduced into the industry, and which also actually was copied by many other Chinese local startups. So that is something where we see the Chinese are currently already innovating, and now it seems Western brands need to catch up and kind of use the same system in order to stay relevant, at least for the Chinese consumer, which are the biggest market, and possibly also for the new benchmark in the world. But is this really a local technology platform? Question mark. What rather comes to my mind is that this could even have something to do with battery swapping. And we know that a couple of years ago, Mr. Diess personally even visited NIO swapping stations and also the NIO houses. So he's very well aware about what is happening. And if you remember my video that I made with Mr. Ferdinand Dudenhöfer, which is like kind of the Pope of the German automotive industry, like the go-to guy consultant and also a media commentator around the car industry in Germany and globally. And he mentioned that despite all of the downs of the economical feasibility of battery swapping and so on, China seems to be determined to introducing it, building it out in the entire country and possibly using it as a standard. And maybe Mr. Dees is actually referring to that, which of course then would be extremely big news for NIO, because what I'm hearing from other industry consultants and so on is that, well, that NIO, of course, with some others like Geely and Bike, has been one of the major players to actually introduce the battery swapping systems and the industry standard which has been introduced in China. And NIO has patented a lot of it. And what I'm hearing is that other car companies are trying to engineering the battery swapping systems, but are not managing to getting around those NIO patents, which ultimately means that at some point in time, it seems like if they want to use also battery swapping, then they would need to make use of NIO patents. And that would result in royalties or licenses that these companies would need to pay to NIO. So in order to use those patents, to use the R&D, and even if the battery swapping stations are not compatible between each other, that's not entirely necessary, but just in case that they want to use those industry standards and those patents, they would have to pay NIO. And well, the question is like, how likely is it? And I think this comes now back to this whole topic, the macro topic about China and the world, and also some thoughts about what Elon Musk recently said.
The United States has been the world's largest economy for as long as anyone can remember. And I think the U.S. became the largest economy, I don't know, probably 120, 130 years ago. And there's nobody that old really anymore who can remember a time when the United States was not the world's biggest economy. Now we're heading towards a situation where China is going to be probably have an economy 2 to 3 times the size of the United States. And so that's just a different world. I do think there are a lot of people in the government in China who kind of grew up with China being a small economy, and maybe who feel like China was pushed around a lot, but they haven't fully appreciated the fact that China really is going to be the big kid on the block, and so like if you're going to be the big kid on the block, then you can really be pretty chill about things. You don't have to worry about, like, other countries are not really a threat to you if you're by far the biggest kid on the block. So I would say that's kind of an important mindset change. Hopefully that China goes through, is just to think, like, if you are the biggest kid, like, how would you want the biggest kid on the block to behave? And now, if you are going to be the biggest kid on the block, then wouldn't you want to behave like you would have wanted the biggest kid on the block to behave?
So basically, what I really like here is this analogy that Elon says that in the past, China has been a small country and it's been bullied around. And frankly, they're even bullied around today. If we look at the financial markets, the way that they are beaten up by Wall Street, and this kind of even economic war, if you will, going on there. Well, I guess China is watching. They're not really fighting it right now. But of course, at some point, if they are going to be the big kid on the block, then what will they do? They will, of course, leverage their size. And I think we can kind of feel that from the statement of Elon Musk, where he's basically saying between the lines he hopes that China will kind of behave the way that, China should behave in a way. And what I'm seeing here as a pattern is something that China has been doing a lot always, which is to leverage their market. And that's also why I think, of course, Mr. Diess is coming out and talking like this, because he knows how important the Chinese market is if he wants to stay relevant in this market, and possibly with those kind of new industry standards that are becoming a standard globally, possibly, then he kind of needs to start aligning with what China is doing. Otherwise, he will be at some point be shut out. And so I think the bigger picture here, the macro trend that we need to watch here is, in case that China keeps getting bullied like that, or the relationship are worsening even more, at some point in time, I think China will start leveraging the size of their market, and they will start to use such kind of standards and also technology platforms that they have created in a way of making sure who is allowed in the market and who is not allowed in the market. For example, in the area of autonomous driving, they may use something called V2X technology. So that is the interconnection between cars and the infrastructure. It's a communication protocol that they can just use and say, well, if the car is not fitted with V2X technology, for example, NIO's newest platform will be fitted with that, then there is no way that this car will be allowed on Chinese roads to drive autonomously. Another of such standards or trend could be battery swapping. For example, if you take the news now that Daimler has up to 20% shareholder of Chinese companies now, BAIC and Geely, which are both active in the area of battery swapping technology. And then the battery provider for Daimler is actually SK Innovation, so a Korean company that is also looking into battery swapping. Then you may see that they at some point will also get pressured into adopting the technology, or else facing issues in the Chinese market. And of course, the Chinese market is so important in the area of EVs that they can basically not afford to not adopt this kind of technology. So in summary, it seems like China is playing the long game here, and at some point may do this kind of a plot twist in which what we currently see, all those crackdowns and regulations are pointed towards Chinese companies, will actually at some point be used against Western companies that want to go into the market. And I think this is what those CEOs like Elon Musk and Mr. Diess are kind of observing already right now. And if you read between the lines, I think that's what they are worried about. And so in case we see more blacklistings of the companies from China, more financial troubles with, let's say, the delisting of Chinese companies and stuff like that, I think at some point this will unfortunately escalate. And this is kind of what we need to have in mind for investments, and also how this may actually play out in the long run. I don't know whether or not Volkswagen will really join the battery swapping technology here. I'm just seeing this as a hint. We know that Audi has officially denied that they will actually have a look at this technology. But on the other hand, if you see how NIO is now breaking into the market segment with the ET7 and the ET5, and they at some point actually really need to stay competitive, then I'm wondering, given also the macroeconomics that I've just explained, if there will actually be a way of not adopting it in the future. Anyways, these are just my thoughts and some observations. Let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Will NIO at some point receive royalties and licenses fees from other manufacturers that need to stay relevant in China or not? And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Have a nice Christmas if we don't see each other before that again. And then hope you stay healthy and have a good time with your families. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next one.